That's right.
Good morning, Mr. Warden.
Good morning.
My name is Aaron Lewis. I'm counsel for the joint parties, the National Asian American Coalition, the Ecumenical Center for Black Church Studies, the Latino Business Chamber of Greater LA, and the Chinese American Institute for Empowerment. I wanted to start off by asking some questions about Edison's outreach activities that you have included in SEE 4. But first, let me just ask you, does Edison track the costs related to outreach activities related to songs?
Not in that fashion. The expenses are incurred by personnel in multiple departments, and so it's difficult to capture those expenses and attribute them specifically to songs outreach.
So there's no one person who can evaluate all of the community outreach spending for songs?
Correct.
Okay. Just as an initial matter here, the leak in Unit 3 was detected January 31st, is that right, in 2012?
Correct.
Okay. And it was announced to the public shortly thereafter?
I believe it was,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Can I ask you to speak up, Mr. Lewis?
Oh, sure, yeah, and this cord is not... Is it on? All right. I'll just speak up. So can I direct your attention to what has been marked for identification as JP4?
All right. Let's, we have marked JP2, JP3, JP4. So as you refer to them, would you please identify them for the record?
Yes.
Thank you.
So JP4 is from Edison's website it maintains for education on. So are you familiar with it?
Yes.
You are. Okay. Can I direct your attention to page 2 of JP4 that I've marked as page 2? Okay.
The handwritten.
The handwritten. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And you're familiar with the map that's on page 2?
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask you, the outreach activities that Edison conducts related to songs, they are split between the emergency planning zone and the public education zone, is that right?
No, I wouldn't say that, because in the wake of the outage in 2012, the outreach was stepped up significantly. And in SCE 4, I identify that there were a lot of meetings further out from the 3 zones there. Okay. So there were meetings with elected officials, government officials, faith-based organizations, etc.
Okay. Can I direct your attention to what has been marked for identification as JP3? It's Edison's response to the Joint Party's data request, question 2, and it's on the final page. It's a summary of annual outreach activities.
I have it.
Okay. For 2012, you note under community events that there were 13 faith-based consumer nonprofit-based forums.
Yes.
Do you recall which denominations, with regard to the faith-based events, were...
I don't recall.
You don't recall, okay. So let me ask you, there's, in JP3, you identify community events, off-site speaking, education and training. Clearly there's overlap in terms of community events and education, correct? Just in terms of the overall goals that Edison has?
Overlap in goals, not in
function.
I'm not sure I understand
Okay, so
the kind of overlap.
So the community events, there's an educational purpose to those, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand why certain events are put into education, training, why some are in community events.
Maybe you could ask her.
What we had in mind on the education and training is there are a number of specific outreach activities at schools. There are outreach activities where we invite classes and so forth to come to, for example, the simulator, the control room simulator. That's what we have in mind in education and training. The community events may be open houses, the beachside chats at San Clemente, things like that, festivals.
I see. So more to build goodwill for Edison.
Well, that may be a collateral benefit, but our intent is to engage the community, to explain what happens at the site, and to contribute to the community in our presence and volunteer efforts and so forth.
Okay. So can I ask you about the San Clemente beachside chats? What goes on at those? What's the...
They're informal gatherings that are advertised in the local paper, and I believe they occur at a coffee shop right at the beach, as it's been described to me.
This is a little odd question, but are those held on weekdays?
No, I'm not sure. I've read about them, I've had them described, I've seen the advertisement in the paper, but I don't recall the day of the week. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. So if I can go back to SCE 4 at page 7, where you list each individual outreach activity for 2012.
Yes.
So immediately after, actually, I'm sorry, let me go back. I'm sure I know the answer to this, but just to establish it, you're familiar with the nuclear disaster in Japan, correct?
From what I've read in the papers.
You know it occurred, and
Yes.
It was a significant event.
Yes.
Okay. And that occurred in March 2011, right?
That sounds right.
Okay. Before the song's issues arose. Before the leak in Unit 3.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Are you familiar with a letter that was issued by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission describing a chilling effect at songs with regard to safety reporting?
Yes.
You are, okay. And I believe that was in 2010, correct?
Yes, it was in the wake of focus groups conducted by the NRC at the site in late '09. So I believe the chilling effects letter was in the first half of 2010.
Okay, and that was also made public, correct?
That I don't know
Okay.
what the process was.
Okay. But I guess I mean to say there was media coverage of it. It wasn't strictly internal to Edison.
I would expect there was. I don't recall
Okay.
what the media coverage was.
So, okay, now let me go back to SCE 4 at page 7. Sorry about that. So in light of the Japanese nuclear disaster and in light of the NRC chilling effect letter and what we believe is our contention was made public and known, I just want to look at some of the events that were conducted by Edison in February and March immediately after the leak. Was there a discussion following the leak about possible new outreach strategies to employ?
So we're at so on page 7, we're at February, March
Right.
of that.
And we'll go through and look at a few of those individually, but just
Okay.
after the Unit 3 leak, was there any discussion that you had with, or that you're aware of at Edison, that was cognizant of, or that proposed a new and increased outreach related to songs?
I don't believe it occurred in February because, remember, we didn't have perfect knowledge
Okay.
in February what the full extent of the damage was.
Okay.
So it evolved as more information was known.
But the leak was reported in the media, correct?
Correct.
So presumably, the public doesn't have perfect knowledge either, correct?
Right.
So knowing this, there was no discussion that you can, just to confirm, there's
Well,
no...
let me try it this way. I am aware that immediately after the leak was discovered, there was outreach right away to brief elected officials and the Public Utilities Commission, and I think there were some media briefings right away. As knowledge was gained, that information began to become part of the outreach activities. So there was additional data included in the regular materials that are used.
Okay.
So, and it grew over time in terms of focus and amount of outreach and the amount of column inches, for lack of a better word, devoted to describing what happened at Unit 3.
Okay, so if I heard you correctly, it took a couple of months, 2 months perhaps, to sort of get the full picture in terms of what you were going to relay to the public?
I think I would defer to Mr. Palmisano's description there. My layman's understanding would be exhausted much quicker than his.
Sure, no, I understand. Well, in that case, so can we look at April of 2012 on page 8 of SCE 4?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay. So, in light of the information gathering occurring at Edison and the recent history in terms of reporting on safety culture and the Japanese nuclear disaster, why does Edison send speakers to Rotary clubs? What was the benefit there?
Because that is a place where members of the community assemble. There are gatherings of people there.
And same with the Relay for Life that occurred on April 21st?
That may have been employees attending on their own time,
Okay.
as well as corporate sponsorship.
Okay. And yet it's listed here under outreach activities. So I'm just trying to understand what on this list has an educational purpose and what is, employee morale or generating goodwill for songs. So that's employee morale.
I would like, that's your characterization.
Sure.
What I would like you to understand is this is the most comprehensive accounting we have of activities under the moniker of outreach.
Right.
It is a combination of formal corporate outreach as well as employees volunteering their own time, and some of these events occur outside the normal business day.
Understood. I'm just trying to evaluate what is part of the outreach plan. So let's go back to JP4 page, I believe it would be 3 and 4. Where it describes the 3 emergency zones.
The 3 zones, yes.
Yeah. So can you explain to me the difference between the public education zone and the ingestion pathway zone?
Yes. These are designations that are set up by the NRC. And it has to do with the NRC's analysis about the potential dangers in the unlikely event of an emergency at songs. In their analysis, the most potentially affected population would be the population in the 10-mile radius. The 20-mile radius would be less likely to be affected, and in some instances the safest thing to do would be to stay in their homes. And then lastly, the ingestion pathway radius is recognizing that in the unlikely event of an accident, the greatest priority in that area is the protection of food stock and livestock to ensure that they don't ingest the radiation. So these are really designed to be indicative of the information provision that would be necessary if an accident were to occur.
Got it. Okay.
Mr. Lewis, can you give me an estimate? I know you had 30 minutes set aside. Does it look like, and you've used about 10, do you think?
Probably not the full 30, but maybe another 10 or 15.
So I suggest we go ahead and continue and complete your cross and then take our lunch breaks. Anyone have a problem with that? Okay, go ahead, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Honor. So with regard to the emergency planning zone, that's where people need to know practical information for evacuation and that sort of thing?
Yes.
Okay. And then the public education zone, there's not the emphasis placed on evacuation routes or that sort of thing, but more just for people's, because they could be concerned or fearful, correct?
Yes, and that the information they need is not identical to the information that people who reside in the emergency planning zone or work there would need.
So why would you say that the information that people need in the ingestion pathway zone, that's not, this is my understanding of what you've said in reading this, is not identical to what is required in the public education zone?
Correct.
And why is that?
Because in the ingestion pathway zone, based on the NRC and FEMA's analysis, that in the unlikely event there would be an accident, they're not in the same degree of danger and should not take identical steps as people who reside or work in the emergency planning zone.
Okay, but presumably, I mean, this talks about ingestion of contaminated, I'm sorry, I'm reading from JP 4, page 4, ingestion of contaminated crops, agricultural products, water, livestock. Evidently, there's something, if something bad were to happen, there's the potential for radioactive material. I'm not a scientist or anything, but from what I deduce from this. So between the ingestion pathway zone and the public education zone, why is the public education zone not extended up to 50 miles? It still sounds like there are bad things that can happen and that people could be affected, and I'm certainly concerned. So why stop the public education zone at, is it within 20 miles of Songs? Why stop there?
That's what the NRC and FEMA direct, and that's based on their analysis of radiation and the unlikely event that there would be an outage. It also gets to prioritization of the population and the steps that they should take in the events that something might happen.
So this is Edison just following the bare minimum is what's required by the NRC.
I didn't say bare minimum.
Okay. It is Edison not doing anything in excess of what is required by the NRC.
We're complying both with the spirit and the letter of the regulations.
Okay. Edison maintains other power plants, as, for example, hydroelectric plants, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So, this may seem sort of silly, but why is there no public education zone around a hydroelectric plant?
I don't know that there isn't.
Okay. Would you say that that people in their day-to-day lives have more exposure to water than nuclear material?
Yes.
Okay, hopefully. So the novelty and information, well, the novelty is with water is less than it would be with nuclear power. Is that?
No.
Let me rephrase that. I'm
understand
sorry.
the question.
Okay. Given that people presumably know less about nuclear power than water and hydroelectric power, do you think there's a greater potential for fear and concern, especially given publicity of the Japanese nuclear disaster? In your opinion.
There's been heightened publicity about nuclear power.
Okay. Let me just step back a little bit and get a little more general. Does Edison consider in its outreach activities related to songs, to the you've said that there's no one coordinating person, but does it consider the demographics of the audience, so race and ethnicity or income levels, when performing that outreach?
I don't know that we spend time about income levels.
Okay.
But we're a part of the community in perhaps the most diverse service territory in the country. And so, of course, we're focused on reaching those communities that are our customers and to participate in their communities quite a bit. We're an infrastructure company that can't leave. Companies leave all the time to go offshore. We're part of the community and part of the fabric in the communities where we are, and our employees are encouraged to participate in that as well as the company does as a corporate citizen.
So let me ask you about the Edison service area. Are you aware of what percentage of the population of Edison service area speaks English less than fluently, as defined by the U.S. Census?
I don't.
Okay. Are you aware of differing rates of internet access by race and ethnicity among?
Check.
Could you elaborate on your objection, Mr. Weissman?
The scope.
We're examining 2012 costs related to songs
Well,
and community outreach and education related to songs.
right.
And so service territory-wide, I'm not seeing the correlation.
Your Honor, if I rephrase to say the county in which songs is based, would that be? I'm not going to pursue this much longer. I just want to get a sense of.
All right, I'll let that question go, and we'll take it one by one, because I
Thank
want
you,
to see
Your
it
Honor.
tied back to what's at issue here.
It relates to, well, it
Just
sets.
shoot your
Okay,
question. You told me
okay.
what you were going to ask. Go ahead.
Does Edison have a sense of differing rates of internet access by race and ethnicity in San Diego County?
I don't know. It's outside of our service territory.
Is songs not in San Diego County?
Songs it is not part of Southern California Edison's retail service territory.
Okay, what about Orange County? Is that within?
Yes.
It is, okay. Edison sponsored a survey last year, I believe, on Southern California residents' views on songs. Is that correct?
It was sponsored by, I believe, the Nuclear Energy Institute.
Okay. Okay. And I believe it was conducted among registered voters. Is that right?
Give me a moment and I can tell you.
Sure. Thank you.
Yes, 1,031 registered voters.
Okay. In that survey, was there any consideration given to differences in voter registration rates by race and ethnicity?
I don't know. What I do know is that interviews were conducted in English, Spanish, Korean, Chinese, or Vietnamese, depending upon the respondent's presence. I understand that your question was about the relative voter registration, but I thought this was
Okay.
responsive.
No, understood. Is it true that Edison publishes emergency information in the phone booth? Or, sorry, the phone book?
Among other places.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I just have a few more questions, Your Honor, and then I'll... So if I can direct you to JP2, or I'm sorry, SCE4, page 5.
I'm there.
Okay, in the left-hand column it says public education.
Yes.
The second bullet point refers to an emergency preparedness brochure.
Yes.
Okay, and then it says it was provided in English and Spanish.
Yes.
Was it provided in no other languages?
I don't believe it was prepared in other languages. The requirement we follow is where there is a population that for whom English is not a first language that exceeds 5% in a given jurisdiction, we are to prepare those materials
Okay.
in language.
In just Spanish and English?
Yes.
Okay.
I said another way, Mr. Lewis, the population has not, of other ethnicities, has not crossed that 5% threshold
I see.
that is in the FEMA or NRC guidelines.
I see. Do you think that the people who do not cross that 5% threshold still would be interested to know?
And if they contacted us, we would do our best to translate.
Okay. Okay. All right. I have no further questions, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Warden.
Okay, so let's break for lunch. When we come back, we still have a cross from Ms. Venskus, Ms. George, and Ms. Sullivan, and Mr. Shaps and Mr. Friedman, and Mr. Shapson is holding on to 5 minutes at the end. Is that the understanding? Okay. After Mr. Warden, there is 10 minutes reserved for Mr. DeMarco. At that point, we'll be considering admission of the SDG&E exhibits, and then that would be followed by Mr. Lewis. We have not seen Ms. Batista all week. Is she going to be here?
Yes, Your Honor. She's planning on being here this afternoon. Something came up, but she will be here this afternoon.
Okay, so do you intend to have her testimony marked and submitted?
Yes, Your Honor. We
And
do.
Ms. George, you still have reserved cross-examination time for Ms. Batista, right? So she needs to be here.
If there's time this afternoon, I don't know what
Okay.
the schedule looks like.
Okay?
I would like to go kind of in the middle of the day because I have quite a few time block. I have a couple
Well,
hours reserved.
we're taking the witnesses in the order that we agreed to them yesterday, so, yes, Ms.
Sorry, Your Honor. I had initially not expected to seek to move any of the cross exhibits into the record, but I'm wondering if I would like to move JP4, the evacuation map from the Songs website.
Any objections? So moved.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, and we're adjourned in, if we come back at 1:30, are we going to be able to finish?
What order did we decide on yesterday? I don't have this written down.
Mr. Worden, followed by Mr. DeMarco, followed by Ms. Batista.
And what about the parties crossed with Mr. Warden?
He's up now.
That's up now.
That's what I'm asking. What order are we going to be in? is what I'm asking.
I go across the list that I have written down here, unless the parties amongst themselves decide to go differently. So I had, in this case, Mr. Lewis asked to be second. And so I put him there. I would say probably, I would go to you, Ms. George, next, followed by Ms. Venskus. Mr. Giesman has waived, and then Ms. Sullivan.
Yes, you can.
I'm sorry. Churn, then Wim.
I've probably got about 15 minutes, maybe less.
Okay.
Sorry, are we still on the record?
I'm going to go.
All right. So let's go off the record and be back at 1:30.